Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next installment of Child Life in Action COVID-19. I'm Meagan Roloff, Director of Member Engagement and Partnerships for ACLP. And in this series, we are interviewing child life specialists to discuss the impact coronavirus has had on their work and some of the really unique and innovative ways that both they themselves and the field in general are adjusting to the situation, both professionally and personally. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by one of our academic professional members, Hannah Knott, and I'm going to give it over to Hannah to introduce herself.
Thanks, Megan. I'm super excited to be here. I have the honor of teaching in the Master of Science in Child Life program and the psychology department at Azusa Pacific University, which is in Southern California. Our faculty are clinical as well, so we get to have a foot in both worlds with supervising students in the hospital and the classroom, which I love.
That's great. I didn't realize you were in both worlds. That's new for me to learn about you. So, just to kind of help everyone else know a little bit more about you and your background, can you tell us a bit about your professional journey from you were a clinical child life specialist initially, and then over the last few years, you've made this transition into academia. And yeah, could you just tell us a little bit, what that journey's been like?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I came to be teaching at Azusa Pacific, I lived in Fresno, California, and I worked at Community Regional Medical Center there. And while I was working full-time clinical there, I had a relationship with the Child and Family Sciences Department at Fresno State. And their students would often volunteer in my program in the hospital. And I made an affiliation with Fresno State to take practicum students. And that was my first exposure to working with students. Wasn't sure how I'd feel about it, came to really love it. And there was a lot of interest from that community at Fresno State in child life. So one day I just proposed offering an introduction to child life course, and they had me create it and teach it as a special topic summer elective. And I had never taught before, was kind of going out on a limb and wasn't sure how it would go, but it was a wonderful experience. And now I have the privilege of teaching at APU, where I am also completing my PhD in higher education and
Oh,
specifically
wow.
studying student success and studying what leads to thriving among students in online learning environments, actually, which has turned out to be very timely.
Very timely. I think everyone is aware at this point that higher education across the board, not just in child life, has had to make some major transitions in the last month or so in order to continue their students' education. Can you tell us a little bit about how that transition has gone for you and your students?
Yeah. First and foremost, I have to brag a little bit about my students. They are amazing. I have been incredibly impressed with their resilience and their positivity and their dedication to their learning in the midst of this incredible stress and uncertainty and transition. I've been encouraged by their eagerness to learn, and I feel very honored to work with them. And all of that being said, it has been bumpy for all of us. At Azusa Pacific, we are doing online synchronous courses in our child life program, which means we have class meetings through Zoom all together. And actually, just last week on a Zoom call, there was a helicopter flying above my apartment complex for about 10 minutes, involved in a police chase with
Oh my
loudspeakers
gosh.
and everything. So discussing child life documentation, which is what we were talking about in that moment, with that background noise became a bit challenging, as you might imagine. And then beyond logistics, there's the initial hurdles presented by having to learn new technologies and, of course, restructuring assignments that you envisioned doing one way and now can't do in quite that same way. So there have been all those difficulties that all educators are facing right now and all students, but also the stress and the emotional toll of isolation and uncertainty that impacts students' learning. I do office hours over Zoom, and our faculty take turns doing a morning coffee hour that students can sort of drop in on Zoom and just share with us how life is going for them. And they're definitely being affected. And I think back to information processing theory, and I think back to how it intersects with stress and coping theory and those building blocks of child life. And we know, because we encounter children and families in the hospital all the time who are under stress, that we are not cognitively at our peak under stress.
Right.
So what many of us are experiencing now, I think it's changed a bit from acute stress in the beginning to some degree of chronic stress by this point, from a source that we did not have a couple months ago. So I know that has made learning more difficult for my students on top of the transition in modality. We are really fortunate at Azusa Pacific. We have instructional designers and media tech teams who have helped us transition to using video conferencing and integrating tech into our courses. So we're learning as we go, and to see our community as a university kind of come together and try to support students has been inspiring, but it has certainly been difficult. It's been challenging all around.
Now, you mentioned you're doing synchronous courses. Are your students, mostly local to the Southern California area, or are they spread out across the country at this point? And how
Yeah,
are you managing that?
good question. So there is a time zone difference for a few of our students. So while most of them have stayed in Southern California, several of our out of state students, well, probably more than several, but at least in the courses I'm teaching, I've had several who have gone back to the East Coast or to the Midwest to be with family during this
Mhm.
time of sheltering at home. And they, sometimes I forget that we're logging on for class at 5 p.m. and it's already 7 or 8 p.m. for them. But that's something where they have been flexible and we are making it work with those synchronous elements. But that is definitely a challenge that can arise.
Definitely. And have there been any issues in terms of like students being able to like access courses? You know, it's all reliant on the internet at this point and
Yeah,
access,
yeah.
high speed access.
Right. I think there are definitely the technological hurdles where maybe your internet connection just isn't great at one point, or you're struggling with the sound settings, and so we've had to be patient with each other as we navigate that. But my students are probably more proficient than I am at using all of those tools. So we are, you have some bumps in the beginning, but we're pushing through. And overall, I think that despite those the hurdles that technology can present, the benefits of being able to see each other's faces and talk to each other and have discussion as a class sort of make it worth it.
Definitely. I mean, that's just something we're finding it within our own ACLP staff. We're all, sheltering in place at this point, and all of our staff meetings are on Zoom, and it's become, a kind of a highlight of the week to just see everyone and
Yeah.
feel that connection. So it's good to hear that that's translating for your students as well. Part of why I was so excited to talk to you today was because you recently posted an article on LinkedIn about the right and wrong ways to describe online teaching and learning, and some of the vocabulary that people use to talk about these learning experiences versus the more traditional everyone's physically together in the same classroom at the same time, and how some of our vocabulary choices um, minimize the potential within online learning. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that and some of those maybe less than helpful vocab words that are coming up a lot.
Definitely. That article came out of sort of things I was reading and hearing as universities all over the country made this transition. And a default assumption that people often have is that online learning is inherently worse or deficient compared to face to face. And there are historical as well as ongoing reasons for people to believe that. The language choices that I advocate for in my article are not necessarily universally endorsed, but my point is that we need to think about our students' need for transparency in a time of crisis. Before I became a child life specialist, I got to work briefly in the linguistics field, and that's what my undergrad degree is actually in. So I'm very interested in the power of the language that we use to shape perception, which of course is something we know about in the child life world.
That's fantastic.
Um,
Bring the linguistic lens to child life. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't at first see how they could overlap, but more and more things keep kind of coming clear, all of the intersections there. So in the article, I broke down what does, for example, a Gen Z student hear when you call something face to face and what assumptions might they make, but when what you really mean is online synchronous and what might be implied to a millennial student by the word virtual. We use virtual reality in the hospital for alternate focus, for relaxation. It's an amazing tool. But it's also fake in the sense that it projects something onto reality that isn't reality. And I don't want my online courses associated with something fake. So I don't want to kind of give that implication. So I want to be very careful with the words that I use. And as educators, I think it's important for us to acknowledge students' frustration right now, validate their disappointment as completely legitimate. They were expecting to be learning in one modality. They are now in a different modality that they weren't expecting to be in. And it's also important at the same time that we encourage students about how far online ed has come and how great of an experience it can be when we're thoughtful and creative and evidence-based in our approach.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to make sure we link the article in the description for this so everyone can check it out because I found it really enlightening myself, just thinking about some of those, face to face. We are face to face right now in a sense, but it's not what people usually think. And I just found it really refreshing and kind of a good reminder that we need to be careful about that language and that nuance. And what you spoke to about Gen Z, I think, that's spot on with everything we're learning about them as a cohort, that they don't want the flowery language, just tell them what's happening.
Right.
Yeah. So related to all of this, and you kind of alluded to it already, but do you think online learning can be as rich, as rewarding as the traditional classroom instruction experience for students?
Yeah, I think the potential is absolutely there. I think there's an assumption that just because you're physically present in a classroom together, learning must be occurring, or just because information is being shared in some format, learning must be taking place. But what cognitive science and psychology tell us is it's not that simple. Our approach to teaching and learning matters, just like our approach to the way we talk to children about their procedures matters, and the words that we say and the modalities we use to communicate information. We don't just verbally tell children about surgery. We bring things for them to manipulate, and we have maybe pictures or videos and medical play and all of these different approaches we take. And so to forget that that is the case for adults as well sort of takes away from the potential of learning. So just because you're in the same room together, exposed to the same content, doesn't necessarily mean you're learning and maximizing your learning. I definitely, believe it's very difficult to engender the same sense of classroom community and the same comfort level with discussion in an online environment, especially when people aren't used to it, that may come more naturally when we're physically in the same space. That's for sure. I would say it's difficult. I would not say it's impossible, because we do have a lot of research and insight from educators who have been studying student success that should be informing our approach to online ed. And right now in this current crisis, we definitely don't have time to maybe explore that or perfect our pedagogy. That would be an unrealistic goal right now. But I'm hopeful that one silver lining that could come out of this whole pandemic is in the education sphere is some reexamination of our approaches and a realization that modern tech does afford us incredible opportunities to connect and engage and learn while defying at least some of the limits of space and time. I do want to acknowledge the very real difficulties and the learning curve with all of that. But if you think about how pivotal communication skills are to effective child life services, they're also the crux of what makes or breaks a quality online course. And that's whether you're teaching asynchronously with the heavier focus on written discussion and communication, because we know that improves critical thinking skills, it makes us more thoughtful and reflective, or whether you have the opportunity for the synchronous meetings like what you and I are doing right now, and maintaining the verbal class discussion element. Either way, students can build that skill set that they're going to need to be effective advocates and effective child life specialists. So that's absolutely rewarding to me to see that taking place as an instructor.
That's fantastic. And you've again talked a little bit about some of the time and resources that it takes to do all this that you've already put in that would maybe need to be put in further to continue enhancing online education. In your hypothetical crystal ball, if you could look into the future of higher ed once we get past COVID-19, what do you think colleges and universities, how do you think they're going to approach online learning? Is it going to go back to kind of what they're comfortable with, or is this here to stay?
Yeah, I think we'll see a few different reactions depending on the institution, depending on the educators. And it's definitely important to make a distinction between, the online learning that's happening now in the midst of crisis and what the future of education can look like. And some educators and universities may have a sort of revelation moment where they realize, oh, this is actually something we are not only capable of, but we can learn to do this well to benefit our students. I expect that we'll see a permanent shift towards expanded access to online learning options as a result of COVID-19, even once all this is passed. And there's a huge opportunity there to increase equity and increase access to higher ed for student groups who face more barriers to getting advanced degrees. Yeah. But it's important that those online options are structured with student learning success and thriving in mind. And that's going to be both the challenge and the opportunity. So online ed, it could be a tool to increase diversity within the child life field by increasing access for those who don't have the
Absolutely.
flexibility to move or attend a physical campus. So I see it as a way to potentially break down some barriers, but the way we go about it definitely matters. And on that note, I hope that for those who do have a rough experience with online learning or teaching during this time of crisis, as many will, that they don't assume that they could never succeed with online learning or could never succeed with online teaching, because again, this is not normal. We're mostly surviving right now, but we will get to a place of thriving. I believe that. I believe when we aren't quarantined and fearful and in crisis and we have some degree of normalcy back, that we'll be better positioned to engage in improving learning experiences both in the physical classroom and the online one.
That's fantastic to hear. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today and sharing, some of your thoughts around online learning. We'll definitely share the article with this video because I think it will be um, just useful for everyone to kind of get a grasp on this language, because it does look like this is going to be our normal, at least for the present. So yeah, thank you again. And to everyone else, we will see you for the next Child Life in Action.